Well, there's been mixed reaction to the latest lockdown announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa in trying to flatten the curve of the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. The level 4 restrictions have come into effect already. We're joined now by Bernstein. She's the Executive Director of the Center for Development and Enterprise, and Dr. Ahmed Bam, Head of Social Development at Stellenbosch Business School. Good evening to both of you, and thanks for your time. And perhaps to begin with you weighing in on what you believe the impact of our latest approach to try to curb the spread of COVID-19 is and will be.
Well, it will only be negative for the country. And frankly, I'm surprised. We sit here we're in the depths of a third wave. We're told it's going to be much worse than the first and the second wave. The Gauteng province doesn't seem to be prepared for this. We have an acting Minister of Health who's also the Minister of Tourism. We have an acting MEC for Health in Gauteng. I think this is an enormous failure of governance. And it's all very well for the President to tell all of us to wear masks and social distance and so on. That's true. But I think government has failed the citizens of South Africa. We have a very weak and very slow vaccine rollout. We were extremely slow out the gates to acquire the vaccine. It's not clear how many we have, and we're not running this very effectively at all. So here we are, we're about to be in July, and the country is in deep, deep trouble. So how long are we going to be locked down in such a severe way? I don't know. Initially, it's 2 weeks. It could be longer. This will have enormous impact as the country was starting to get going economically, and we've now closed down entire industries like the alcohol industry.
Dr. Bam, that's one of the difficulties of this moment that we're in, that government seems to be coming up with redundant solutions to problems that are quite fluid and require agility, flexibility, and planning for worst-case scenarios. One doesn't get the sense that that's happening.
So I want to agree with that, and we shouldn't be shy to say that government has really failed. I think the President himself alluded to that yesterday, recounting Nelson Mandela's an excerpt from the book, A Long Walk to Freedom. So I think there's an acknowledgement in some ways, but we don't really see that in action. And when we look at the non-profit sector, I just want to point out that the immediate impact is going to be on the ability to deliver services to those most impoverished and those most in need. And again, there's a gap that non-profit organizations fill, particularly where it is that government itself and the market or businesses cannot reach. So there's an immediate impact on service delivery. The second aspect that is tied to that is the ability for those organizations to remain viable and sustain themselves. And here again, if we understand that it's largely person-to-person services offered, and that fundraising takes place in a very personal manner, where you need to have people gathering, to a large degree, in an environment where it is that you can share what it is that you do, there's going to be an immediate impact. I've also said this before, that government, when it is that we restrict the ability of certain sectors to operate, the impact on those sectors, particularly the private sector, when we look at how they generate income and how they then share that income through social investment, it's going to have an impact on the non-profit sector. And government itself, if people aren't working, how are they going to expect that they are able to generate taxes sufficiently to ensure that we keep going? So I think, there's a lot of what I agree with in terms of what Anne is saying, is that a year ago, what we didn't really have was, or maybe it's even longer than that, we didn't have that hope of there was a vaccine and it was going to be rolled out, and that in some ways we could curtail the impact of this virus. But today we're sitting with that, and what really is the way forward?
What becomes difficult, and for these industries that are continuously having to bear the brunt of these lockdown restrictions, is that what we've seen over the past year is that there's often been very little support for some of these small and medium enterprises, and where it has been promised, it has not arrived in the way that government has said it would.
That's true. I think the country is in a deep fiscal crisis, so we don't have enormous resources to hand around, and that doesn't seem to be taken into account very effectively. I think that it's hard to see what the government has been doing over the last few months to prepare for this third wave. There are hospitals that are not open in Gauteng, and all of this is going to be devastating to individuals, to families who will struggle. The sort of bottom half of our society is going to struggle, and even many more people as well. So this is terrible for South Africa, and I am surprised there isn't greater reaction. A friend of mine said today we should have spent a lot more time on getting the vaccination right rather than prohibition, and I couldn't agree more with that. So I think this is a massive failure of governance, and it's time that people took accountability for this. Why does nobody ever get fired for not doing their jobs? So I think South Africa is in a very deep trouble. And I'm tired of the president talking to the country, not taking questions from the media. There are a lot of questions to be asked. I agree with the editor of Business Day today, who suggested we needed a serious investigation into how South Africa has dealt with the pandemic once it's over. I couldn't agree more, but for now, it's vaccination, but we failed. So here we are in a very deep crisis situation where we don't know how bad it's going to be in Gauteng, never mind the rest of the country, and people's lives are at stake. We need to appoint the very best person to be the Minister of Health, a leader who can put teams together very quickly, who has experience in running big teams with big consequences. And the president should be looking way beyond the ANC to the very best person in South Africa to help get us out of this terrible situation.
Dr. Bam, just on the issue of NGOs, and you know, as Anne is detailing just how much trouble we are in, NGOs play the role of being at the coalface effectively when it comes to dealing with the gaps that exist in some of our social security systems. So they're the organizations that would do home visits. They're the organizations that know how many people in the community need food and would ensure that people are as supported as possible. Under the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen a decline, even in the kind of resources that are filtered down to these organizations from government. What does this mean for them? And I suppose not just government, but with even private companies cutting down their budgets, many have been left on the brink.
Yes, as Anne was alluding to our economic recovery, I think we expected that to take at least 5 years. For these non-profit organizations under the pressure at the moment, we thought that maybe a year and a half to that 5 years, they'd start to recover and start to get back to what it is that they do. But that impact at the grassroots level is what concerns me most, and how it is that government has, in its wisdom, has cut 6 billion rand from the social development budget just this financial year. And if we look at over the next 3 years, I think it translates into something like 36 billion rand. So it's quite apparent that they've shifted their focus and understandably to some degree to focus on the pandemic. But to take that amount of money out of the budget for social development has real impact on our citizens who can ill afford it. And that money is generally channeled through these non-profit organizations to deliver those services. So I'm not sure what government expects to do when it is that they're cutting budgets, and that business cannot function in a particular way, And we still, as Ed says, we sit with this conundrum of how is it that we're actually going to get out of this? And I think Ed is very optimistic to think that politicians can think out of the box in terms of appointing the right people for the job. I think they tie themselves into that, in some ways. But that is one of the solutions. We have to look at who is driving what agenda and people that can get the job done. And that, unfortunately, is where we are at.
Anne has been talking about accountability. Dr. Bam, in your view, what would that need to look like in this moment?
Well, I think first of all, what was lacking from the president's speech yesterday was a thank you. And I will do a name drop and say a thank you to the gift of the givers who have come in and done some sterling work during this pandemic, and many other organizations like them. That was really sorely missing. Instead, what we saw was a scolding of us citizens and rather a review of what government has done and where they have actually failed. So what does that accountability look like? I think to have responsible leadership, there has to be integrity. And we can say that if we are busy funding commissions at this stage that have cost us, I think it's something ridiculous, over 80 million rands required still this year and no one has actually been jailed at this stage in terms of the corruption that we experience. So when we look at accountability, integrity is at the heart of it. And that is doing the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And I don't see that filtering through our society quite often. In fact, there's a disintegration of that. We see that the social contract is disintegrating. People are more self-interested than what it is that they are concerned about, how it is that they're developing society.
All right. Let me thank you both for your time tonight. That was Anne Bernstein, the Executive Director of the Center for Development and Enterprise, and Dr. Ahmed Bam, he's the Head of Social Development at